We model the visible universe through two lenses. One side shows the raw data of celestial motion, and the other shows the precise equations we use to predict it. This approach leaves a gap at the base of our physics. We can calculate the exact curvature of spacetime or the probability of a quantum event, but the reason these specific laws exist remains a mystery. We currently treat physical laws as external instructions, fixed rules already in place before the first particles appeared. The values defining our universe, like the electromagnetic force, are treated as starting inputs. We calculate their limits, but view the numbers themselves as arbitrary. This leads to an interpretation where the development of complex life and conscious thought is viewed as a series of accidents within a vacuum that happen to have the right settings. Physics begins only after these givens are established. The result is a system that predicts how the world moves without explaining why it is structured to move at all. The Unified Coherence Closure Framework changes the starting assumption. It suggests the universe is a process of structural necessity, where laws are not inputs, but the stable residues left behind as the universe forms. This hinges on a principle called closure admissibility. It suggests that for any world to exist at all, its internal relations must reach a threshold of stability. In many theoretical configurations, relations fail to hold. If the internal forces are too weak or inconsistent, the structure collapses before it can establish a world. If the relations are too rigid, the system becomes locked. There is no capacity for transformation, movement, or the emergence of complexity. Our reality represents the specific relational balance that permits both long-term persistence and the freedom for new forms to evolve. This explains fine-tuning as a matter of requirement. We don't need an external tuner, because only the admissible configurations, the ones that satisfy the conditions for stable relation, can disclose as a physical world. This framework identifies a sequence required for stability. Relation, difference, and constraint generate coherence, which stabilizes into a world. Relation is the first requirement for intelligibility. Without a connection, there is no basis for measurement. Difference provides necessary distinction. Without it, the universe remains a blank, undifferentiated unity. Constraint introduces a stabilizing boundary. It ensures that these differences are structurally bounded rather than dissipating into chaos. When a relation survives change, it produces coherence, a system finding a way to endure. Closure is the final threshold where these relations stabilize into durable form. This is the moment mathematical possibility becomes physical fact. The preservation of these relations through every scale of the universe is called omnilectic invariance. It is the thread that keeps the logic of reality consistent as it grows more complex. This sequence forms the coherent universe ladder, a map showing how basic relations compound into complex systems. At the base, we find the most stable layer of disclosure, the domain of physics. We can interpret matter as bound coherence. Particles are not separate things inside the universe. They are stable patterns that persist because they have achieved closure. Gravity is the geometric cost of this stability. It is the coherence constraint that binds local forms back into a global relational field, manifesting as the curvature of space. Quantum mechanics describes the behavior of relation before it reaches this final threshold. It is the partial disclosure of coherence before it closes into the durable, classical objects we see. Physics provides the initial stabilization layer, creating the ground upon which higher orders of coherence build. As we ascend the ladder, the structures become more concentrated. Life emerges when a system's closure becomes self-maintaining. It uses metabolism and repair to actively defend its own internal order against the environment. This is a dynamic victory over entropy. The system doesn't just sit there, it actively regenerates the conditions of its own existence. Scaling higher up the ladder brings us to the tier of mind. If life is self-maintaining coherence, mind is recursive coherence, a system that has developed the capacity to model both itself and the world around it. Perception is an active mapping process. Diverse sensory inputs are integrated into a single field of experience, allowing the system to react as a unified whole. This clarifies the binding problem in neuroscience, the question of how the brain creates a unified experience. In this framework, that unity isn't a mystery, It is the mechanical result of the system reaching a state of integrated closure. With mind, the universe becomes interior. It begins to observe and interpret its own relations. At the summit, coherence coordinates across time and through multiple minds. Meaning arises when we recognize how these relations belong in a context. Value appears when we evaluate those contexts and select which possible futures to bring into reality. Civilization is the highest known coordination of this process, using institutions and shared history to preserve these values across generations. For a civilization to survive, it must protect the coherence of its information and its trust, ensuring its structural logic remains intact as it scales. A system at this scale must choose between extraction and circulation. Extraction consumes the stability of the foundation for local gain, while circulation returns support to the field that generates value. A system that only extracts eventually fragments. A mature civilization recognizes that its own stability depends on the health of the ecological and social fields that support it. This leads to a fundamental maxim. For a system to remain coherent, value must return to the field that made that value possible. The next step for this framework is formalization, developing the specific closure equations that can derive the constants of physics and model the flows of a regenerative economy. We are looking at a single nested architecture. The rules of stability governing an atom eventually manifest as the rules of stability for a society. Because our minds can model these dependencies, we arrive at what is called coherence responsibility. If our existence depends on the field's stability, then our survival requires us to act as stewards of that stability. The stability of a physical particle and the health of a planetary civilization are two aspects of the same logic. By understanding the conditions of closure, we move from a universe of accidents to a reality we can responsibly sustain.